Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the September 26th edition of Gateway to the Stars. I think we have a fascinating program scheduled for tonight. If you were with us in May, we'll cover some of the same themes of light pollution and its effect on nature and ecosystems, but we're going to expand it to a regional rather than just a St. Louis emphasis. So the title of our first program, starting shortly, is Lights Out Heartland, and we have several Missouri organizations that are going to join us and report on light pollution and how it affects them. Then at 7:30, we'll have Virtual Stargazing at the Gateway Arch. John Strebeck from the St. Louis Astronomical Society is going to give a narrated tour of the night sky using the Stellarium program. And then after that, we'll have some video images that are submitted by St. Louis Astronomical Society members. Now, light pollution, our main theme, and that's very important to the National Park Service. Our theme, our mission, is to preserve unimpaired the natural and cultural resources and values of the national park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. And we partner with a number of organizations to help us fulfill that mission. And locally, we have partnered with the Missouri Division of the International Dark Sky Association, and they have partnered with Truman State University in a new initiative. And what they're doing is they are presenting what are called sky quality meters, like this one, that measure the brightness of the background sky, because you really need to quantify how much light pollution there is in order to know how to deal with it. And so a number of state parks, cultural institutions are having these sky quality meters, and tonight I'm pleased to announce that Gateway Arch National Park also will host one of these sky quality meters, and we look forward to the results. Of course, we know we have a lot of light pollution here in downtown St. Louis, but good information is important whether or not we like the result. Another aspect that the Arch has been involved in is the floodlighting. Now, when Eero Saarinen designed the Arch in 1947 and 48, he actually intended for the Arch not to be lit at night. He wanted it to reflect the ambient lights of the city of St. Louis, the surrounding area, sunrise, sunset, and moonlight. So for many years, the Arch was not lit. However, a lot of local people felt that the Arch should be floodlit at night so it could be seen and enjoyed at a greater distance. And many years ago, it was decided to floodlight the Arch.
Floodlit Arch at night.
However, our park wanted it to look as natural as possible, and we came up with a great compromise, and the picture here shows that the Arch does look quite natural, and now it is visible at quite a distance. Unfortunately, floodlighting the Arch did cause some problems with the migration of birds, as you might imagine. And many years ago, the park entered into an agreement where the floodlights would be turned off during the first half of May and the second half of September each year to facilitate the migration of birds. And we're glad that it's worked out so well for a long time. And of course, right now, we're in the dark period for the Arch floodlighting for another few days. So, a lot to talk about tonight. At this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Mr. Don Ficken. He is the president of the Missouri chapter of the International Dark Sky Association. He's going to introduce our other participants tonight. And folks, I hope you enjoy the program. Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. My name is Don Ficken, as Ranger Rich Pfefferman said, and I'm president of the Missouri chapter of the International Dark Sky Association. It's my pleasure tonight to moderate tonight's Gateway to the Stars program. We have two great programs for you tonight. The first is called Lights Out Heartland, where we will focus on bird migration and artificial light at night. We're going to start our program with a 10-minute video that was recorded by the National Audubon Society earlier this year. This video will provide a good foundation for understanding bird migration and artificial light on a national scale. And then we will turn our focus to the regional area with live speakers from Missouri and Kansas. Each speaker will introduce themselves as they begin their presentation. And around 7:30, we're going to turn our attention to virtual stargazing, where members of the St. Louis Astronomical Society will give a tour of the night sky using planetarium software and show videos and images of night sky objects taken by members. And just for fun, we're going to add in some constellations that have birds that you can see in the Milky Way. We have set aside time for our questions following each program. We actually have two different groups of audiences tonight. One are on Facebook Live, and we have also some people on Zoom. And so if you can hold your questions to the end of each segment, if you're on Facebook, you'll need to type it in the comments area. And if you're on Zoom, you'll need to type it into the chat area. So let's get started. I'm going to first start by playing it's really a very good 10-minute video by the National Audubon Society that will set the stage for our later presenters.
Recording.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us for an overview of birds and artificial light at night. I'm Connie Sanchez, Program Coordinator for Bird-Friendly Buildings at National Audubon Society.
And welcome. My name is John Roden. I'm the Senior Director for Bird-Friendly Communities at the National Audubon Society.
John and I are both part of Audubon's Bird-Friendly Communities team. So what do we mean by bird-friendly communities? With our bird-friendly communities efforts, we're seeking to provide food, shelter, safe passage, and places to raise young in the communities we share with birds across the country. Today, we'll be focusing on the safe passage aspect of this work, and in particular, the way that artificial night at light affects our native bird species. John?
Thanks, Connie. So why is this an issue? So this satellite image gives an overall impression of the amount of light that's emitted at night across the United States. And if you think about it, this is a phenomenon that's only been in existence for about the past 150 years when we had the ability to actually beam light into the night sky. It's grown massively since then, and it continues to grow. And why does this matter to birds? So if we look at birds across the globe, about 19% are migratory. However, if we drill into North America, about 70% of the species that live in North America are migratory. And if we think about those migratory or those North American species, about 80% of those migrate at night. We think there are a few reasons for this. So migratory flight is obviously very energetically expensive, and it's actually cooler at night. So it may help keep birds cooler as they're making their migratory flights. They can also avoid flying at the same time as the birds that prey on them, since raptors generally migrate during the day. And also there's an additional resource for them to use to navigate by. That's the star map and the moon. And now these are navigational aids that have been present during their evolutionary history. Increasingly, they are getting obscured by all the light we're pumping into the sky, which is what we're talking about today. So how do we understand how birds are moving across the landscape at night when we can't necessarily see them? So one way to do that is with the use of radar. There are a network of 143 stations across the country that help us quantify the number of birds that are traveling across that landscape. So this image on the lower right shows what those radar images look like at these stations. So you can see that there's this concentration across the middle part of the country, and what that translates to is millions of birds traveling. And this happened to be on a night in April of 2017, where looking over time at what we can infer from these data, we can tell that up to 178 million birds were actually traveling, many of them through that central flyway across the middle part of the continent. Okay, so there's been a number of years, about 20 years, that people have been looking at this kind of information. And what we've learned is that billions of birds are actually moving across this landscape during fall migration and spring migration. So you can see that birds will be flying from the south, entering the US, and some large number still continuing on up into Canada in the spring. In the fall, the numbers are augmented by those baby birds that are produced by the breeding birds. And you can see that at the end of the day, over 4 billion birds are leaving the North American airspace during fall migration. It's a really massive, massive phenomenon. Now, the birds that are migrating face a number of challenges, and this slide shows what the built environment, how challenging that can be for them, and the risks to mortality for all of these structures across the landscape. During this presentation, again, we're really focusing on the impact of light, and we do really want to share some recent research that's helped us identify where we should focus our efforts to address artificial light at night to help migratory birds. So this slide shows a synthesis of data from a paper that was published in 2016, which shows that the top 125 cities in the country account for a very small amount of the landmass. But if you think back to the slide at the beginning of the presentation, they actually are broadcasting an immense amount of light into the atmosphere and account for 35.4% of the light reflectance across that landscape. But about half of the United States actually experiences light polluted nights. So more recently, there was a paper that was published last year which looked at the data on these 125 cities and looked at the amount of birds that were flying through reflected in that radar data, and then overlaid that on the light emitted from these cities. And the authors used that to calculate an exposure index. So it actually is showing where birds are most exposed, at most risk of seeing artificial light at night, so that we can help pinpoint our activities where, if we do lights out activities, we can help them the most. So I'm going to show you this slide now. It's a little bit busy, so I wouldn't focus so much on the left-hand side of the slide, but more on the right-hand side. So what this graph has is its fall rank with increasing exposure risk toward the right on the x-axis. On the y-axis, it's the spring rate with increasing exposure to the top. And what you can see is up here at this, the upper right corner, which is blown out here on the far right of the slide, is the cities that have the most risk both in spring and fall. And there's some interesting culprits here again in the middle of the country, Chicago being the #1 risk city for birds in spring and fall. And so that's, again, a combination of the fact that so many birds are traveling through that area, plus it's emitting a tremendous amount of light. But you can see there's a number of cities here on these axes that are problematic for birds. Okay, I'm going to hand it back to Connie to talk about Lights Out programs.
Thanks, John. So now, based on what we know, how do we address this issue that artificial light at night presents to birds? We've got Audubon's Lights Out program, a national effort that involves various partners across the Audubon network across the country. And these programs are focusing on raising awareness of the issue, engaging communities in taking action, and advocating for solutions to help. Audubon chapters, centers, state offices, they're all working with building owners and managers to turn off excess lighting during the months that migrating birds are flying overhead. And we're helping to provide them with safe passage between their nesting and their wintering grounds. So turning off bright lights helps birds move on within minutes. And this was discovered by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and New York City Audubon during the annual 9/11 memorial in New York City. Now, hundreds of birds are caught in the memorial's beams every year, but turning them off for just 20 to 30 minutes at a time greatly reduces the density of birds in the area. So taking more steps like this to decrease the amount of light our buildings emit really minimizes unnecessary bird deaths and can also save money by reducing energy consumption. A little bit more about the history of lights out efforts in the national network involved. The Fatal Light Awareness Program in Toronto was the first to raise awareness of the problem that lights pose for birds in an urban center starting in 1993. And in 1999, Audubon and partners established the first Lights Out program in Chicago. Now, since then, groups in many other cities have organized programs to make a difference for birds. You'll see here on the map, the yellow circles on this map show where Lights Out programs include partnerships with International Dark Sky Association. So they're working together in those areas. And you'll be hearing some more about these local efforts and collaborations in the St. Louis area focused on birds and light in a continuation of this presentation from our friends at IDA Missouri, Audubon Center at Riverlands, and the St. Louis Audubon Society. Now, a number of jurisdictions around the country have pursued efforts to address light pollution, and policy change is increasingly a focus of our collective Audubon efforts. Now, what can you do to help? Explore more about our Lights Out activities online on our Bird Friendly Communities site. Learn about the specific actions you can take for not just Lights Out, but as well as other Bird Friendly Communities programs. And connect with your local Audubon chapter, center, or state office to see how you can get involved in these activities and more. So stay tuned for more information about what's happening locally, and reach out to us with any questions regarding bird-friendly buildings and Lights Out. Thank you.
Thank you all.
So that was a pretty good introduction, I think, to what we're going to do locally, which is the Lights Out Heartland. As you can see from the video that was just played, there are a number of Lights Out programs throughout the country. And in fact, in St. Louis and Kansas City, there's been a number of bird safe programs. So we've had something to build on as we think about how to address the issue of light pollution and bird migration. As many of you know, and also as was mentioned by Ranger Rich Pfefferman, the Gateway Arch has had a program to turn off lights, which is another really good foundation for us to build a regional effort. And in the spring, which is what this video was really built for, we've actually progressed a little bit. We've added some additional locations. We had what's called a Silent Skies Lights Out St. Louis program, which was led by the St. Louis Arts Chamber of Commerce. And that was really a pretty good launching point. And just recently, if you've not heard about this, IDA, which is the International Dark Sky Association, and the National Audubon Society formed a partnership, really trying to work together. It's a win-win for both organizations, working on both light pollution and, of course, keeping birds safe as they migrate at night. So what the result is from our Lights Out Heartland effort is that we have really kind of come a long way. We've got a number of really great organizations that have already signed on to be part of this going forward. We hope to do this every spring and fall. And we've even got a nice website. You can check that out. It's certainly a work in progress, but I think it's a really good start. And we hope a lot more things will be done. We want to, of course, raise awareness about this, but we also want to take some action around actually doing things to keep birds safe. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, and I'll let her introduce herself. And let me get, I think you should be able to talk, Dana, is that right? And
Thanks, so Don. Can you hear me?
Just get you spotlighted here. All right, there you go.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dana Ripper. I'm with the Missouri River Bird Observatory and also representing Burroughs Audubon Society of Greater Kansas City. We are thrilled to be part of the new partnership that is Lights Out Heartland, and very excited to be here with all of you tonight. Next slide, please, Don. So there's a lot of discussion about the migratory bird flyways, and there's sometimes a little bit of disagreement in terms of what the actual exact boundaries are, because as you all know, birds don't necessarily, follow state borders. So I've given a few examples of maps here. And you can see that kind of no matter which way you cut it, our region here in the Heartland is really, really important for bird migration. We're kind of at the crux of two very big flyways, the Central and the Mississippi. Next slide, please. So the folks at Audubon there on that excellent video talked a little bit about birdcast. This is some birdcast radar data from just about a week or two ago. And these data from the radar system really, really quantify the importance of our region to migratory birds. One more slide. So you can see that was the 13th of September. This is the 17th of September. And we have really very, very high migration activity going through our region. Some of it has to do with the great rivers systems that come through our region. So the Missouri, the Mississippi, the Ohio, and other watersheds that provide a lot of good habitat for migratory birds. One more slide. So what Birdcast does is it also provides migration forecast maps based on a number of factors, day, timing, and wind being primary. So bird watchers actually use this to figure out good days to go out and go bird watching, knowing that the chances of migrants arriving based on these predictions are very high. I think it's something that is a tool that could also be used for buildings and municipalities and even individuals to identify the most important nights in which they should turn off their lights. Next slide, please. So the Audubon Society folks talked a little bit about recent studies that have looked at exposure to light, and Cornell University and others published a report just last year in 2019, taking into account that factor, lights, and a number of other factors, including geography, the flyways that we looked at a little bit ago, and determined that here in Missouri, our two major cities are pretty high on the list of the most dangerous cities for birds. And this is this particular study was looking at lights and also collisions with windows, which my colleague Crystal is going to talk about in a little bit. But I wanted to point out that aside from these anthropogenic dangers that we've sort of put on the landscape in terms of artificial light and buildings that can be collided with, naturally, migration is an incredibly arduous feat to begin with. You're talking about something that is maybe a few ounces that's flying several hundred miles a night. They can come in contact with bad weather. So for instance, some of our migrants, particularly in the spring, actually take off from the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, and they cross the Gulf of Mexico in one flight. The very familiar ruby-throated hummingbird does this. So just natural weather systems in such a risky situation could prove fatal very easily for birds that are undertaking this. There's also competition for food resources, of course, during migration, during stopover, and then the risk of predation as well as they're moving hundreds of miles. So added to this are sort of the man-made dangers and threats that birds are now facing, which are that they have a lot of habitat loss during migration and during their stopovers that they have to contend with. Outdoor cats take an incredibly high toll on birds every year. And then the change in climate and the associated extreme weather events that are man-caused that we're all experiencing right now. Next slide, please, Don. So I just wanted to point out just a few of the many, many dozens of species that migrate through or to our Heartland area. And here are some of them here. Swainson's thrush, ruby-throated hummingbird, indigo bunting, prothonotary warbler. We're gonna look at a couple of their migration routes, not all of them. Go ahead, Don. And then game birds, such as the American woodcock. So a lot of folks are surprised that they're a migrant as well. And of course, many of our sparrow species are also migrants. So these are maps from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and I'm just gonna show a couple examples, and you can see as it moves through the year, I believe you can kind of see, thanks, Don. You should be able to see a smooth transition in sort of how these birds are moving throughout the landscapes. The Swainson's thrush is a very long distance migrant that goes to winter in South America. One more, yep. Here's our ruby-throated hummingbird. As I mentioned before, they will feed and feed and feed there on the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico and then cross the Gulf, particularly in the springtime. You can see they often take a land-based route because they're not in such a hurry during the fall. And one more. So the indigo bunting, this is also a species that will cross the Gulf. And you can see that a lot of their migration, as depicted by the dark blue color, please pardon the tree frogs in the background, they're really using our Midwest, our heartland, as an important migration route. So anything that we can do to help these birds is a good thing. So last slide, please, Dawn. Birds, thank you for your help. Hope you enjoy the rest of the program.
So I'm Crystal Antone, and I work at the Center for Sustainability in Johnson County Community College. That's in Overland Park, Kansas, which is a suburb of Kansas City, Missouri. Next slide. We have been running a, window collisions kill a lot of birds every year. Just the first thing that kills birds is cats, and then the next thing is buildings. So it's a pretty important thing to concentrate on. We find that birds that hit windows, or there's been studies that birds that hit windows are very vulnerable to predators, or they succumb to their injuries at a rate of about 70% within 3 days after they die. So it's really important, if you happen to have a bird that's hit a window, if you can get it to rehab. We've had really good luck with that. We have about an 85% recovery rate. Next slide. This is the study that we started in 2018, and we've been doing this study for 3 years now. We walk 2.5 miles of buildings every 24 hours, 7 days a week. With COVID, we're close, but we're not quite at 7 days a week. And then we are picking up the birds and, sorry, I keep losing my spot. We're walking this 2.5 miles every day and picking up birds, and then we record them in a very specific way. Next slide, Don. So we have a photo data sequence, and we take pictures to show the species of the bird, and then we take context photos of where the bird struck, which is very important because that's how we figure out like what windows and what areas of buildings are really bad and that we need to fix. Next slide. And once the birds are collected and we do that photo data sequence, we upload them to iNaturalist. And there they can be crowdsourced for identification. So when I first started, like I didn't know any birds, and well, I knew robins and cardinals and stuff like that. And now I know lots of birds with the help of a lot of people that come on to iNaturalist and help us identify the birds that we find. And from here, we use the photos to record the data into our database. Next slide. So we found different issues on our campus, and one of the other issues that has we've come to realize is that we have really bad light pollution on our campus. And there is possibility that that is causing night migrating birds to land within this environment that's hazardous to them. And then during the day when they're foraging and resting and stuff, that's when they're coming into contact with these different issues we have on campus. So we have glass that's see-through, we have reflections of trees, and we have buildings that were designed as sort of funnels that once a bird gets in there, it's hard for them to correct and get out. And then we have glass bridges that are at treetop height. And we have both reflective bridges, and then we have ones that are see-through as well. Next slide. So this is the map that we made from the data we collected in 2018. We picked up about 300 dead birds, and then we also realized that we had some other issues. So we have 3 glass stairwells on our parking garage, and they're bird traps, it turns out. And also we recorded window imprints. So that would be like the barred owl on the first slide that left all the dust on the window, but we didn't find a bird. So there was 138 of those. We do know that we're missing a large percentage of birds due to fly-offs of injured birds, and then also predators. Right now we know, because we have them on camera trap, that We have 2 coyotes that are prowling the campus nearly every night, and we know that we are losing birds to those coyotes right now. Next slide. So that map and the data helped us decide how to treat the windows to keep birds from running into them. So we decided on dot patterns, and we chose 2x2 dots, 3x3 dots, and 4x4 dots. This is what it looks like looking out a window that has 2x2 inch spaced dots on it. And by far, the closer the dots are, the much more effective it is in reducing bird strikes. Next slide. Then we also put a decorative dot pattern that has 2x2 spacing on our bridges. I treated the worst side of each bridge in the hopes with these clear bridges that both sides would be affected. So we have had a really large reduction on some bridges, almost 100%, on the treated side. And then on the untreated side, where the birds can still see the pattern through the glass, we've reduced them by 50%. But we will be putting more remediation in place to do both sides of most of the bridges. Also, I left a gap at the top, sorry, Don, of some of these bridges where we didn't put dots, 12 to 18 inches, and then I left some of those gaps at the bottom. And this is a lesson that I've learned, leave those gaps at the bottom because birds tend to correct upwards. So we have birds hitting that gap at the top, but not hitting that gap if we leave it at the bottom of the glass. Next slide. This is the data from our phase 1 remediation. So you can see in 2018, that's our 300 strikes. And this is only counting birds that we know hit the windows. It doesn't include the window imprints because those are a little bit subjective. And then the robins and the mourning doves. So we found they don't follow the same pattern as migrating birds. We call the robins random robins because they just hit windows all over the place and they don't seem to have any pattern at all. Whereas migrating birds are tending to hit the same locations at about 70%. And then I just mentioned between 2019 and 2020, 1 year we had a bunch of construction on campus, and then this year the campus was closed and we had a ton of bird activity, may account for some variation in the data. Next slide. So this is what the American Bird Conservancy recommends, and this is the sort of what we based our treatment of our windows off of, is a 2-inch dot by 4 inches wide, so the birds don't think they can fly through them. However, hummingbird spacing is considered 2 by 2 inch dots, and that keeps hummingbirds from running into the windows. So you can see the 2 by 2 inch dots, we've seen a 92% reduction, and then it goes down from there with the 4 by 4 space dots, only a 68% reduction. Next slide. So there's also a study that's happening in Kansas City, Missouri, downtown, put on by BirdSafe KC and the Borough's Audubon Society and Missouri River Bird Observatory, in which I'm involved. And we are also doing surveys there. And it's based on the campus study that we've done. So it's a lot of the same methodology. Next slide. You can see we've come up with route maps again, and on specific buildings that we know have issues. And then we have a few buildings out in the suburbs that have been reported to have issues as well. And we have volunteers that walk these routes and collect data much like the campus survey. Next slide. And this is one of our window numbering systems so that we know specifically where the birds strike. That way we can suggest the least expensive treatment for the section of windows that are the worst to our business owners. And also those birds are recorded on iNaturalist. Next slide. And then this is just quick, all the species we've collected on our campus, and you can see Swainson thrushes is the #1 species that we pick up. I think we had 45 1 year, now we're up to like 68. And the next slide. Just showing you like the variety of birds that we have that are hitting windows. And we just got a black-throated green warbler today on campus as well, which is a new species that we haven't seen yet. Next slide. And there's just everyone's contact information if you need to get a hold of anyone or if you'd like to volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Jean, if you can take over now.
Sure. Hello, my name is Jean Favara, and I am Vice President of Conservation for St. Louis Audubon Society. And I'd like to talk to you tonight a little bit about our program, Bird Safe St. Louis. And the goal of this program is to establish long-term community relationships that will support bird safe practices and reduce bird fatalities due to light pollution, building and window collisions. So a lot of people before me on this presentation have outlined the problem for you. And what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about this project that we have just started at St. Louis Audubon Society. And we have built this project on a couple things. We, as St. Louis Audubon Society, did avian mortality surveys back in 2000 to 2003. And actually, this is one of the key ingredients that went into the mix of working out an agreement with the Gateway Arch for turning off the lights in spring and fall migrations. And we were very kindly had information shared from Bird Safe KC Group, which you've just heard from. And we've learned from them, and we want to take what they've learned and apply it to downtown St. Louis. And we just started our first surveys this fall. And next slide, please. So where are we surveying? Right now we're focusing on downtown St. Louis area. This area, why this area? Well, two reasons mainly. This was an area that was surveyed in 2000 to 2003 by St. Louis Audubon Society, so we want to build on that data set. And it's also an area that a group of us went downtown and we looked around and we looked for buildings with large amount of glass and areas of glass mixed with vegetation and parks. And it turns out it's about an 8x8 block area, and it's bound on the north by Washington Street, on the west by Tucker Street, and on the east by Broadway Street, and on the south by Clark Street. And we broke this up in two surveys areas, a west survey area and east survey area. Each area has roughly 9 buildings, and the total buildings we're surveying is 19. We have 2 survey teams that work. They work in pairs, walking this survey area of 2 volunteers each. Next slide, please. When do the surveys happen? Well, one of the things about fall is the migration for birds is extended time. Some species leave as early as July. Some species are not leaving until November. So we came up with a compromise of starting from September 1st through October 15th for this year to at least get a slice of what's happening downtown during our fall migration. We are not surveying every day. We may expand that with as our resources for volunteers expands, but for this fall, we are surveying on Tuesday mornings, Thursdays, and Sundays. We start first thing in the morning and after sunrise, and it takes about 2 hours to complete our survey in a given area and on the east or west side. And again, our data collection platform is iNaturalist. There's several nice things about iNaturalist, one of which is if you want to volunteer the program, you don't have to be a bird identification expert. iNaturalist allows you still to enter data, and it is crowdsourced to ID those birds. So it allows people who are not necessarily bird ID experts to join in the program and work with us and contribute to the project. Next slide, please. And for this fall, starting on 1st of November and going up to 9/20 at least, we already have 103 observations. This includes dead birds, stunned birds, and even peregrine falcon kills, so we suspect are peregrine falcon kills. And the thing to keep in mind, unfortunately, we're probably greatly undercounting these bird strikes because these are not daily checks, and we do have cleaning by maintenance crews of the buildings and in the city streets itself. And there are areas that are inaccessible to our survey volunteers. These include some courtyards that are only accessible from the inside of the building and some ledges. And of course, we have birds that strike and are stunned but fly away. So our observations up to this point, I'm sure, are a grave undercounting of what is happening. And right now we have recorded 31 species in this fall migration period. And for us, our most observed bird is right now is the ovenbird, followed by northern water thrush, and ruby-throated hummingbird is our third most found bird, unfortunately. And you heard Dana speak about the migration pattern of the hummingbird, so we know they're moving in the fall. The other interesting aspect of this project is we have been working with Royal Bird Sanctuary, who actually bans peregrine falcons in downtown St. Louis. And we are able to take our data and help them understand how peregrine falcons are using the downtown landscape to kill birds and feed their young. So next spring, we hope we will be able to help them identify future nesting sites. Next slide, please. What are our next steps? We will continue doing our surveys in 2021, in spring and fall. And we may change what buildings were surveyed depending on what the data tells us. We would like to expand our effort if our volunteer resources are available. We'd like to understand what the lightscape in downtown St. Louis is like, and we will partner with IDA to do that. And we want to start building collaborative community relationships with the businesses and building management downtown, and participate in outreach opportunities with these businesses. So we want to identify how to best mitigate the problem areas and how to implement those mitigation strategies and help them track their progress towards improvement. We are lucky in this area that we can leverage existing programs in St. Louis. There's the Earthway Center, which has a green business challenge led by Jean Ponzi, which is a natural way to work with businesses that want to be green. And then we also have a St. Louis Audubon Society program called Bring Conservation Home, which focuses on native landscaping for homeowners, but it would also allow us a way to work with homeowners to improve their lighting situations and their window situations to help protect birds and keep birds safe in the St. Louis area. And so that's a summary of our project, and we're excited to be involved in this collaboration with all these organizations to keep birds safe in both the Central and Mississippi Flyway. And next, I'm going to go back to Don, and Don will talk to you a little bit about how you can make sure your home lighting is safer for birds.
Well, thank you, Jean. Obviously, buildings can be a big part of this, and there are some programs. If you go to the lightsoutheartland.org website, there's some programs there that as a building owner or manager, you can help us out. But a lot of times people just want to do this at home. They say, what can I do to reduce light pollution? And IDA has a simple, what's called 4 Ps, and I'll show you a little bit more elaborate version of that in just a moment. But it really comes down to, you might say it's common sense. We want to make sure the light's in the right place. In other words, we don't want to stream it up straight up in the sky. Why would you waste light and just light up the sky? Just put it exactly where you need it. You want the proper amount. In other words, yeah, I know you can get an LED that's maybe cheaper so you can get a brighter one. You think it's more safe, it maybe really isn't. So just get the amount of light that you actually need. And we like to really stay below 3000 Kelvin. If you look on the side of the light bulb boxes, you can typically find the Kelvin there. You want what's called the warm light. Of course, only use it when you need it. A good example is ball fields. Why would you have the ball field lit up all night when you're only playing the game a short time? Why do you need it to have as bright whenever you're only striping? That type of things. And of course, the proper spectrum. So these 4 Ps are a really good place to start. And if you go to darksky.org or darkskymissouri.org, we can tell you a little bit more about that part of it. What's exciting is that IDA, the International Dark Sky Association, recently came out with what's called a home lighting program. And that's, they partnered with the Illuminating Engineering Society, and they took those 4 principles and made them just a little bit longer, just 5 principles. And this is all on our website. But the cool thing is you can go out there and look at this, and you can do assessment for your home. You can actually go through a little checklist and say, hey, is my home compliant or not with dark sky friendly lighting? Now, your home by itself won't make that much difference. But if you take all the homes in all the cities, and if we could somehow turn down the lights a little bit, that can make a difference on birds and animals and plants in terms of just the way they work. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn to questions. We have, I think this program is officially slotted to go to about 7:30. I know we have some folks on Facebook, and if you could start typing your questions in, let me go over there and see if I can find some. And we also have some on our chat, and I need to kind of get organized so I can see the questions here. We'd appreciate that. So Okay. So I'm getting some people saying that they had a little bit of trouble finding the particular program tonight. This will be stored and obviously on basically the Facebook Live. You can go back and play that. And in a day or so, we'll actually have this out on the Dark Sky Missouri and also Lights Out Heartland. That we have YouTube accounts set up, and you'll be able to basically look at the whole, once again, the whole program. I have a question from one of our Zoom panelists, our Zoom folks, is where in St. Louis are the peregrine falcons? Can you guys respond to that question for me?
Sure, Don. This is Jean. I can speak a little bit to that. As I understand it, for example, on the, what I was told that several years ago, there was a nesting peregrine falcons on our courthouse, Thomas Eagleton Courthouse. It's not clear that they're still there. We have actually discovered some bird carcasses that suggest that they're at least hunting in that region. So we're not sure that they're nesting there. But the other organization that is working closely with downtown peregrine falcons is World Bird Sanctuary. And if you contact them, I'm sure they can give you more information of locations of peregrines in the downtown area.
Okay, so we have one person. This is maybe more of a cool comment. I hope it's a good comment. They said that they moved here from Chicago and they think St. Louis is actually darker. Do you think that's the case? I'm guessing with the stats on Chicago, with the bird strikes up there, that Chicago is obviously a little brighter. Of course, it's a bigger city too. Any thoughts about that?
Don, if you want, I can try and take that one, even though I'm not in St. Louis.
You can try if you want to, sure.
But I'm originally from the Chicago area, and it is partly that it is a bigger city, of course, so there are more lights just by density. And also the fact that it's situated there on the lakeshore is definitely a migration bottleneck as birds kind of go to the lake. I know this sounds strange when they're willing to cross the Gulf of Mexico, and some will cross, the Great Lakes, but they tend to go around the land side, and Chicago's right there. And so just a variety of factors. Chicago has a long-standing bird collision monitoring program, and my understanding is that it's very widely known publicly, and there's a lot of cooperation with building owners in Chicago to do some lights out because of the Chicago bird collision monitoring program.
Okay, so we have somebody on Facebook that says, wow, that's a lot of species affected. And I was a little surprised myself. I'm not a Audubon Society member, but I'm looking at this from an IDA point of view and saying, wow, that's a lot of wildlife that's being affected. Another person on Facebook Live has asked the question, will businesses be offered a recommendation or solution once data is collected by BirdSafe, like dot pattern or on Windows, or will they be offered solutions now? In other words, they're asking if there's going to be recommendations which are from your findings. Maybe Jean, can you address that at all?
Sure, Don, I can talk a little bit to that. Right now for us in St. Louis, as I said, this fall was our first survey done. So we're just collecting our data now, and we will be working in the future once this data is collected this fall and next spring to make those connections with businesses, to work with them, to help them understand where the problems areas are and what the best mitigations might be. And actually, I'm sure that the information that has been shared with us tonight will be information that we can share with them as far as patterns, dot patterns, and that type of thing in the future.
Okay, so I have another question. This one's from Zoom, and they're asking how to determine the falcon kills as opposed to the Cooper hawks. Do you have any insight on that?
I am simply going to say that when we discovered the carcasses, I communicated with some email communications with experts at World Bird Sanctuary, looking at what type of carcasses they would expect from peregrine falcons. And when I told them the condition of the carcasses we were finding, they indicated that was likely peregrine falcon kill. I don't know enough about Cooper's hawks kills to know if we can actually rule out other raptor kills, but the folks at World Bird Sanctuary felt pretty sure, based on the species that were being killed and what the state of the carcass was, that these were likely peregrine falcons.
Thank you. So I have another question. This one's from Facebook. What about human safety with street lights and mall parking lights? You want me to address that one? So I'll address that from an IDA point of view. You know, a lot of folks mistakenly feel that a brighter, even the brightest light possible is actually safer, and that's simply not true. As one of our board members who's a professor says, when you get bright lights, you also get bright shadows, and frankly, people can hide in shadows. And also, he has this fun thing, he says, well, if the brightest lights in the world are the safest, then why isn't New York the safest place in the world? Because you just have everything really lit up. I think you have to have the correct lights, and humans, if you think about how you might drive down a highway and you have a really bright street light and then it goes dark for a while and a really bright street light again, your ability to change your eyes from one light to the dark to the light to the dark is simply not very good in terms of just safety. So there are studies. I think there are some important ways that lights can contribute to safety, but I think it's simply overblown how that really bright street lights and parking lights actually make life more safe. So then we've got another question. What are the dots applied to the windows made from, and where can they be purchased?
This is Crystal. I'll take that one.
Okay.
For our campus, for aesthetic reasons, our dots were custom made. It is a 7 to 10 year vinyl material that looks like etched glass. But you can buy pre-made dots. And if you go to the American Bird Conservancy website, they have a whole section on where you can buy different window treatments and window dots and that kind of thing, and other patterns. It's a really great resource if you're looking to treat your windows. Yeah, for our campus, we had ours custom made because we care too much about how they look.
Okay, so we have a question here. Can you have a light that is aimed at the ground and not to the sides? And I will say that's a big thing from IDA's point of view, is that it's called stop down lights. You can go find, really you want to, particularly with the LED lights today, you can find that these lights can be very precisely aimed. I mean, literally, I went to a ballpark in Arizona, and it was so tightly aimed at the field that you actually had to separately light the parking lot. So today, what you want to do is very precisely aim this down, and what you do is you get what's called stop down lights, to where it actually shields the lights and only focuses it onto the ground. And that's a really good start. And you'll be surprised, you actually don't have to have as bright a light, because you don't have to light up everything all the way around it, and you can focus the light just on the area that you really want to light up. And then if you keep it below 3000 Kelvin, then you're getting into that warm structure. So for those of you on Facebook, one of our professors who works on the sky quality measurement, he's the guy that's actually behind that meter. He inserted a link from darksky.org. And for those of you on Zoom that aren't not able to see that link, what I'll do is I'll actually take that link and I'll post it out here on Zoom. But it's a good way. There's a lot of really great materials on the International Dark Sky Association, about which at darksky.org would be the website that you can find about how lighting works. And also the National Audubon Society has a lot of great stuff about lighting and birds. So I'm going to post this out here on our local chat and see who else has some questions here. So while we're waiting, I don't see any more questions right off the bat, but we had a chat before we started today about New York, the 9/11 big spotlight kind of thing. Can somebody just talk about that a minute? Because it was kind of one of those unattended kinds of things. They want to celebrate, obviously, this great memorial that's going on, but you got these really bright lights. But the problem is it's messing up birds. Maybe one of our speakers here can talk about what they're trying to do to fix that. How about Jean? How about you? You talked a little bit about that. I know they're turning them off every so often, right?
Sure. So those, if you're familiar with the 9/11 memorial, it is spotlights. They're shot up into the sky for a certain duration during 9/11. And what they found, unfortunately, was these bright, very bright spotlights causes birds to come out of their migration flight and be distracted by the lights and fly around in the lights. And they found birds were being trapped in the spotlights. And New York City Audubon started actually counting the birds that were in the spotlight. You could see them through the spotlights and count them. And they set up a counting system where volunteers come in while the spotlights are on. They count the birds in the spotlights, and once they reach a approximate number of 1,000 birds seen within all the spotlights shining, they have an agreement with the people that run the memorial, and they shut the lights off for around 20 to 30 minutes. That releases the birds, and they continue their migration flight. And they found that that is enough time to have all the birds continue the flight. But it is a pretty amazing thing to see. There's quite a few YouTube videos showing with the beams pointing up in the air, and you see the birds flying around in the beams. So it was a great way for New York City Audubon to reach out to the memorial people, and they have worked together to protect the birds from those lights.
Okay, so we have a question here from one of our Zoom participants about, are yellow lights better than warm lights? And actually, I see that somewhat similar, because what happens when you get into the brighter spectrums, you get into what's called blue light, which is not very friendly to plants or melatonin for humans or human health. So it tends to get a little bit more yellowish and orangish, if you will, as it gets warmer. And think about a candle, how a candle tends to be kind of a yellowish light. That would be the more natural type of thing for us. In other words, a fire kind of thing. And when you get into the complete bright white lights, and I know when I talk with people about, these bright lights, they immediately focus on like someone's driving toward them with their headlights on bright, and it's extremely distractive and difficult to see. And think about that as terms of the white lights. And I think we may have answered this question: is what is being done with the survey data? Have building owners been informed of the problems of lights and our windows? I think we may have addressed that, but did we just specifically address the question of whether or not they're being informed of what you're finding? Is there a feedback mechanism, Jean, or the folks from KC?
So we're in a somewhat similar situation as St. Louis, where BirdSafe Kansas City was only started in 2019, and there are some places, particular windows, for which we do have quite a lot of data at this point. And so when that is the case and we're able to make a compelling case, we have started approaching building owners. And that's absolutely the point of the data. I think, Crystal's study on the Johnson County Community College campus is a well-designed experimental study, which has really provided the opportunity to look at how effective the window treatments are. And that in turn, we're thankful that she's sharing that with us, because that in turn is going to help inform both Kansas City and St. Louis in terms of really targeting the window treatment and the mitigation to make it as inexpensive as possible for building owners. And obviously it's a completely voluntary thing, but absolutely no one is saying, I'm putting this window here to kill birds. They're not doing it on purpose. And so it's a great opportunity, but that's absolutely the purpose of the survey data.
Okay, great. So I think we're about ready to wrap up here. I will say that if you go out to Dark Sky, Missouri, or darksky.org, darkskymissouri.org or darksky.org, you can learn a little bit about the home certification program. You can learn a little bit about how lights work in terms of spectrums and all those type of things. And there's also some pretty good stuff on crime and safety under the International Dark Sky Association. I think with that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for the speakers. You've done a great job tonight. It's really been a pleasure to work with you, and we're going to move on to our next program. And by the way, thanks to the Gateway Arch for allowing us to spotlight our Lights Out Heartland program tonight. and we're going to move off to the stargazers. Stick around. We're going to talk a little bit about, mostly about stars for the next segment, but we're also going to talk about some birds that you can find that are constellations, which are a lot of fun. So thanks to everyone, to all the speakers, and we're going to move off to the next section right now. John, if you can take over the screen, I think we're going to kick you off with the stellarium kind of thing. And thank you, ladies. Great job.
All right. Thank you, Don, and thank you to our fellow panelists. That was really intriguing, and appreciate the data and all your work. It's really profound. So thank you. I hope, Don, you can see stellarium. Can you see it okay?
Yes, I can. I can. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Well, let me start off by saying there's going to be a sky survey that I'll do here. What we're going to do is cover 3 areas. The first area will be how to orient yourself and how does the sky operate. And that will help you when you go out to hopefully use your star charts and understand what the sky is up to. Second thing we'll look at are some fall constellations, late summer, early fall constellations. And of course, as Don said, we hope to honor our fellow panelists with a look at a couple bird constellations. And then finally, at the end, we'll look at a few of the planets and what they're doing and pass off to Mark Jones, who will show us some really interesting photography. So let's go ahead and start with the first section, and we're going to orient ourselves. What I hope you see are, as you go out tonight and you look up, you look for the bright things, of course, and your eye would be attracted, of course, to the moon and Saturn and Jupiter. They are the brightest objects out in the sky right now. As I go out in my backyard and I look up, it's to the south, and that's true for most of us here in St. Louis. You look south, you're going to see Jupiter and Saturn, of course, and the moon. And as we've said in previous discussions about Saturn and Jupiter, they both just passed what we call opposition. And that's where we're between the planet and the sun. Between, like for instance, with Jupiter, you'd have a line of the sun, Earth, and Jupiter. So we're going to be watching Saturn and Jupiter as they go into the fall. They're going to start receding from us further, so they'll start dimming. Right now, Saturn's about twice as far away from us as Jupiter is, so it's a little less bright. And then why is it that these planets and our moon seem to follow this line, this ecliptic? And of course, that's the path of the sun. They all kind of fit within a zone there. And what's happening is if you can imagine a tabletop with marbles, then as the marbles roll around, that's very much equivalent to being on the ecliptic here. So you see the Saturn, Jupiter, moon, all kind of rolling on that same plane and showing up as you see here. And so that's a very helpful thing to orient ourselves. What's fun to know there is that zone around the ecliptic is where the planets and the moon generally follow. They are fairly close to the sun's plane here, but not exactly. So you follow this zone with the constellations. For instance, you see Sagittarius there, Capricorn, Aquarius. And then as you see the line at the top here is our own celestial equator, and that's a projection of our own equator. And you can see it's a little different than the ecliptic, and that's because our Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees to its plane of revolution around the sun. So there's a little difference there, but what we really gain from all that is we find out which way is east and west, and that really guides us into the night sky. We know how things are going to move. You might notice over a length of a month, if you were to watch the stars, that the stars move fairly quickly within a month's time. If I go back just a month, you see Sagittarius here, whereas now at the same time of night, it's further west. So it's moved a good amount. If you were to chart that over time, you would see the stars move about 4 minutes earlier every night. They rise 4 minutes earlier. So over a month's time, that's about 2 hours, and that's why you see that shift. And that certainly shows you how and reflects how the Earth is going around the sun. So we see different constellations throughout the year. So as I go to the east here, and I have a good indication of which direction is east from the ecliptic and from the equator, Then I can go and find north and still orient myself. As I head up north, I know that I'm going to be looking for Polaris, and I'm sure you've heard of the North Star before. And there we see, I'm looking north now, and of course I'm cheating a lot, but I can tell you there's Polaris, and there you see it described. And of course, you probably have been raised to go ahead and find the Big Dipper. And of course, the Big Dipper is an asterism, and it has the dipper here, the cup, and it has the pointer stars. So as you follow up the pointer stars, that's how you find Polaris. Certainly, most of us have no problem finding the Big Dipper when we face this direction north. What happens though at this time of year for us at this latitude is that as we go into the evening, the Big Dipper will get lower and lower. It won't set quite, but it will get lower. And you see the trees slowly get in its way, and it gets a little harder to identify. So what we'd like to do is point out another way to find Polaris. I know that I'm facing the general north direction by earlier work I did, and I'm going to go ahead and try to use another constellation here. You'll see it lit up here by the name Cassiopeia, and I'm sure you've seen this if you've attended earlier sessions. You see Cassiopeia over here, and it finds as you go from the Big Dipper to Polaris, it pretty well runs into Cassiopeia. So that's to say, and then if you can find the Big Dipper is a little hidden, look for Cassiopeia. It's this very nice W or M, depending on how you're looking at it, but it's a nice grouping of stars. They're all about second magnitude. And just remember, you can kind of use these middle stars to point to Polaris. So that kind of takes us to our orientation for the night sky. Just to recap, we had the ecliptic, which was the path of the sun with a zodiac around it. So when we see bright objects that we know are the planets, and of course we see the moon, we know we can nail down the ecliptic. That shows us east and west, and then we can come north and look for Polaris. And we like Polaris because it doesn't move, and it gives us a good reference all night long as to which way is north. And now you have a new constellation, Cassiopeia, in addition to the Big Dipper, to use to find Polaris. So let's press on and move on to the second part of our discussion tonight, which is about the constellations that are up. And as I come around to Cassiopeia, let's just start right there. You see the Milky Way coming right through. It's a very prominent part of the sky, and there's a lot of objects to see around it. Cassiopeia is, of course, a queen who was married to Cepheus, King Cepheus, and her daughter was Andromeda, all of whom you see in this little portion of the sky. There's quite a story there. Long and short on Cassiopeia is that she thought her daughter was more beautiful than some of the other royalty, and it upset Zeus and a couple of the other royalties, so they nailed her to this chair, and she's chained there. So the part of the year she's upright, and the other part she has to be hanging from that chair. Kind of a hard way to spend your time, but that's the story. We're going to press on. Let's do a little more with Cassiopeia. What's kind of fun to see if you have a nice pair of binoculars is to go ahead and look for what's called the double cluster. And that's right off of Cassiopeia. If you were to follow that middle star in Cassiopeia and come what looks to be east or northeast, you come right into what's called the double cluster. And that is a open cluster, two open clusters that are very prominent in the fall as we get into the night sky. Let me see if we can show you what the open cluster looks like here. And it's a double gathering of open clusters. And open clusters, you ask, what is an open cluster? And in short, an open cluster is a loose grouping of stars that are they're gravitationally connected, and they generally form from the same molecular cloud, so they have very much the same composition for that grouping of stars. They form with about the same time, so it's a rather nice experiment for astronomers because they can chart out what different masses of stars with the same composition do over time. What's fun about them as well is they're most of the time, pretty young, because what happens over time is they get disrupted by passing uh, other clusters of stars or gas clouds. So they don't last very long. There's a lot of them in the Milky Way. There's about 1,100 or so. You compare that to the globular clusters, only about 150. And so you can see that there's a lot to see with open clusters in the night sky, particularly so in the plane of the galaxy, which is where we're at right now, in the plane of the galaxy. So look for those right off of Cassiopeia. It's called the double cluster of Perseus. It is closer to Perseus, but it really gets more prominent as we get into the night sky. Well, let's move on into our discussion here from Perseus, or from Cassiopeia rather, and use Cassiopeia to continue our star hopping, which we love to do to find and learn more constellations. I'm going to use this middle star in Cassiopeia. Instead of following it towards Polaris, I'll follow it the opposite direction, and that takes me right to this constellation called Pegasus. Inside of Pegasus is this great square, as it's called. And let me highlight that. So you look for this great square of Pegasus. What happens is it starts to rise as we get into the fall, and you'll see these 4 stars. They're fairly prominent. Again, all about 2nd magnitude, 3rd magnitude, so they're still fairly bright, very prominent. And again, as it rises, it's not exactly a square, it's more of a diamond shape. But as it moves into the night sky and rotates around, you'll see it. So don't be fooled, it is not a diamond, it's a square, and you'll see it more prominently as you get higher. Now, what's the story with Pegasus? Let's get the figure going for that. Pegasus is a winged horse, and I think you can kind of see here the head of the horse and the body, the half of the body, and so certainly the legs. It's Pegasus was the horse that Perseus used to rescue Andromeda. Andromeda is right here. She's tied to the coastline. You see how they show it graphically here. But it's a really good constellation for us to go and find some other constellations. I'll show you that in just a minute. Just a couple things to point out with Pegasus. What's fun is the globular cluster that's just off the nose of Pegasus is a beautiful cluster called the Pegasus cluster. And it is a very prominent globular cluster. Let me see if I can center it here. And it's, again, a globular cluster. So you're going to see the symmetric grouping of stars, the ball of stars, very much different in context and so forth to compare with open clusters. But let's continue on. So look for that with your binoculars. You want to look for it just off that one star. If you put your binocular on Enif and go this direction, it should pretty well show your Pegasus cluster. So try to do that with your home binoculars. Enif is a nice gold star to see. The other thing then we want to look at with Pegasus is that tied to it is a Andromeda. One thing I'd like to point out with Pegasus, before we get too far, is that it is a constellation where the first exoplanets were found. And you ask, what is an exoplanet, John? And I'd have to tell you, an exoplanet is about any other planet that's not found in our solar system. And if you go back in time to about 1995, astronomers found the first exoplanet in Pegasus. Let's look and see where it is. You can't really see it, but you can look at where it is and know what you're looking at in the night sky. And there right off of Pegasus is this object, 51 Pegasus, and it's the location of the first exoplanet. And that's going to be a lot of interest further into tonight. Mark will highlight some of these exoplanets. Another interesting exoplanet to highlight is the one that actually was the very first one to be photographed. And let's look at that. That's also kind of fun to see. That one is called HR 87. Again, a really prominent thing in the exoplanet or extra planet. Oop, I think I lost it, but I think you saw where we were looking. But again, really an interesting part of the sky. Again, you're not too far from the Milky Way, so you're seeing other stars with planets. Quite a rich area of astronomy at the moment. We also wanted to highlight this fall, you'll see Andromeda. We saw her as she was draped out here. What's really fun about looking at Andromeda is you'll see the Andromeda galaxy. You come right off this middle section of the Andromeda, off of New Andromeda, and you'll see the Andromeda galaxy. And that's really a lot of fun to see. If you're in a very dark sky, you'll see it with your unaided eye. You can see it without binoculars. Let's zoom in so you get a sense of what you're looking at. You see in your binocular, you'll probably see a pretty, if here in the city, you'll probably see a pretty good fuzzy patch right off New Andromeda there. And of course, as you get out in darker skies, it gets bigger. So it's quite a large object to see. It's tilted to us as a spiral galaxy, but it's tilted, so that's why it looks elliptical in that character. And again, it's only about 2.5 million light years away. And as you know, I'm sorry, 2.5 million. And as you know, that's really not too far in terms of cosmic scale distances. So it's a very close neighbor. It is a galaxy that's a little bit bigger than ours. Really fun to see with your binoculars. And again, if you're out in the country, you might be able to see it with your unaided eye. Well, let's move on. We've really worked this part of the sky pretty good. We'd really like to get to see other things here. Let's pull up again. Oh, let's pull up again Pegasus. We're going to go back to the square part, the great square of Pegasus, and we're going to use the bottom stars here in Pegasus to follow on and star hop through some dimmer parts of the sky and find Altair. Altair is in that bird constellation we were talking about, the first one we'll talk about tonight, called Aquila. Let me pull up the image so you can see how she looks. Aquila is a really, it's a word that means eagle. So Aquila is the Latin word for eagle. Altair is an Arabic word and it means eagle's head. So very strong association with birding here. What's fun about Aquila is as you go in and look at the different stars in Aquila, the really most interesting one for us tonight is this one I've highlighted, Eta Aquila. And what's going on there is it's what's called a variable star. In fact, it's called a Cepheid variable, which is to say that intrinsically it'll flare up and recede. So you get this oscillating character of a star, and it gets brighter as it expands and it gets dimmer as it contracts. And in fact, the cycle there, it's about, 7 days. So if you were to watch it over a 7-day cycle, it would change in magnitude from 3.5 to 4.4, which is a very noticeable thing with your eye. What you would do is you would look at the other stars around Aquila that have that equivalent magnitude and compare it night to night to the surrounding stars, and you would see that variability. And it's a lot of fun to watch. A lot of amateurs like to watch that. So let's move on back. I didn't mention it, but Aquila is a bird that carries the arrows for Zeus. When he needed the arrows, she was the one that carried them. Going back to the great square Pegasus, let's pull up the square again. Again, you see the square. And if you use the diagonals across that square, you come up to Deneb, another nice star hop, easy to do, very prominent this time of year. Deneb is in the constellation Cygnus, which you see here. Cygnus is the swan, and Deneb is in the tail. As you come forward through the middle part of Cygnus, you end up with Albireo. Albireo is a really beautiful double star to see. Albireo has a blue and a gold star. You will need a telescope to see them. So in the meantime, what could you do? There's a really nice double star you can see with your binoculars called Omicron Cygni, and it looks right here. You can actually zoom in on it. Let's see if we can do that. It's a really beautiful, really beautiful double star. And let's see here. If you can see that, you can see that it's actually a easy star to identify right off of Deneb and there's other stars in Cygnus. Highly recommend that with your binoculars. All right. The other thing to notice about this part of the sky with Cygnus, and that is that it lies right in the heart of the Milky Way. Let me turn off the graphic, and you can see the surrounding areas with that nice band of stars, the Milky Way. What's fun to see in here is that the Milky Way has a little character to it. So there's this area called the coal sack, the northern coal sack. You see this area right here. It's some gas and dust that's in the plane of the galaxy. And there are stars on the other side of the coal sack, but it's absorbing all the photons, all the light. So you end up with these dark patches. It's also called the Cygnus Rift. Again, all part of the Milky Way and a really interesting part of the sky. Another thing we'd like to point out while we're in this part of the sky is that we're in the territory of the summer triangle. And let me turn off some things here. And here you see we had Deneb we've been looking at. Let me see if I can pull this around so we can get a little better seating on this. And then the summer triangle, of course, is with Deneb, Vega, and Altair. As we get into the fall, you will see this asterism as it goes into the west. And it'll start to set as we enter the winter season. But for right now, it's still very prominent. It's a very nice way to find. There are two bird constellations, with Deneb being the tail of Cygnus and with Altair being the head of the Aquila, the eagle. Another constellation I will just like to pull up is, you see Vega here, the other star in the summer triangle. It's a very fun, let me pull this up. Is in Lyra. There's this star right here. You have Vega. This is the star called Shelliac, and it is a beautiful, don't think I have it quite on there. Let me see if I can, there we go. Shelliac is also known as Beta Lyra, and it is also a variable star, a little bit easier to see than, and it's a very classic one to find. Again, the magnitude will change in there. It'll be about a 3.5 to 4.5 magnitude change over a 13-day time cycle. Definitely want to give that a shot if you're interested in variable stars. So let's leave this part of the sky. We're going to get back to our two planets, and we'll use the Milky Way as our roadmap. Again, you see the rift there, the lane of gas and dust that stops the photons from getting through, but it certainly speaks to the character of our Milky Way. Let's get back down here a little better. You see Saturn and Jupiter. Again, we just passed Saturn and Jupiter in opposition back in July, and of course that was meant to be our key word for the night, is opposition. So we're meaning to say we've passed the point where we are between the sun and those particular planets. And we're now going to see Saturn and Jupiter into the fall and into the early winter. They will start dimming, not dramatically, but enough that you'll see a change. and then we'll be able to watch them. They'll actually get really close as we get into December. But let's talk about the real highlight of the night in terms of planetary work. And of course, there's our lovely moon. As we get into about an 8 o'clock time frame, Mars will be coming up. And Mars, of course, is in Pisces here at the moment. But if you look due east at this time of night, about now, actually 8 o'clock, you'll see Mars. And it's just really lovely to see. What I want to say is that about every 2 years and a few months, we and Mars get close together. And in fact, it gets a little tricky with Mars because it has an eccentric orbit. So while we can say that we're having opposition for Mars on the 13th of October, prior to that, on October 6th is actually when we're going to be close. So it's not but a week or so between our closest approach and opposition. But it's really the biggest we'll see Mars. And in fact, it'll be so big now, it won't be this big again for us till 2035. So this particular time frame with October is a really good time to pull up and see Mars. And if you can get to a telescope or use your binoculars, I think you probably really want to try to use a telescope and pull it up. And that's about all I have for tonight. Just a quick review, and then we'll hand off to Mark Jones. And the first thing I just wanted to highlight tonight was that we used Cassiopeia to find the North Star. And that's really helpful when the dipper's so low on the horizon, it's hard to see because of trees or what have you. Try to use that, look for that W, look for it tonight. It's not too far from where we are now with Mars. The second thing I wanted to highlight was to use the Great Square of Pegasus, the asterism there, or the Summer Triangle asterism. Use either or both to find Cygnus and Aquila and honor our previous panel members with that. And then third and last is that our key word for the night is opposition, and have fun looking at this time with Mars as it goes through opposition and its closest approach. So with that, Mark, I am done, and we'll hand it off to you. I'll stop sharing, and I thank you all for listening.
Well, thank you, John. So Mark, if you can go ahead and key up yours. And for those folks out there on Facebook, just type some comments. If you have questions, type those into our comments. And of course, if you're on Zoom, type them into the chat area. We've got some really cool videos coming up here that some of our members have made, some pictures of Mars and so off. I'll turn over to Mark.
All right, thank you. Yeah, this is a great time of year. September and October are the season where the skies get dark early, the nights become cool, the skies become very clear. Now we got a great opportunity this year to see a number of planets that John's talked about. So I want to share some of the images that we have with you. Tonight, Saturday, the September 26th, not only is it the Gateway to the Stars night, but it's actually part of International Astronomy Day, and also part of International Observe the Moon Night happens tonight. Now the harvest moon, or the full moon closest to the equinox, is occurring on October 1st. So that is just a few days away from us. So you can keep an eye on the moon over the next few nights. Now John was talking about the planets, and this it gives you a little bit of an idea of the size of the planets through a telescope as compared to the moon. I think we all know we can see the disk of the moon with our unaided eye, and it gets bigger as we look at it through binoculars. But the planets are so much further away that their size, or their apparent size, is much, much smaller than the moon. And you really need to use telescopes and significant magnification in order to see any sort of features on these planets. And this illustration here is taken out of a program just like the one that John was using earlier tonight, Stellarium. And it gives you an idea of the planets that are currently visible in the sky. We start at the top of the page here. We have Venus. That's a morning object right now. So if you get up before sunrise, you'll see that Venus will rise around 3:30 a.m. on this date. John mentioned Mars, and you can see Mars is shown there on the right. It rises about 8 p.m., as John was mentioning earlier. Jupiter and Saturn are also evening objects, and they appear pretty much due south right after it gets dark, as you saw from John's sky maps. Now, Uranus is very close to Mars, and in terms of where it's at in the sky, so it arises around 8:15 p.m. And then Neptune is kind of between Saturn and Mars in the sky, and it rises around 6:15 p.m. Certainly, Uranus and Neptune are difficult objects and require very large or high magnification telescopes in order to see any sort of detail. And hopefully this scale rendering here gives you an idea on what to expect. So when you're out with your telescope, please keep that in mind. Always use the moon as your basic reference object. Now let's talk about Mars. Mars is, as John mentioned, is only closest to us every 28 months or so, and it's coming up here early next month. And these are some images that were taken by one of our members, some really outstanding, stunning images that have been taken of Mars over the last month and a half. The image in the lower left here is actually a video, and you could see it dancing around and moving. And that is typically what you will see through a nice high-powered telescope when looking at Mars or any of the planets. You'll see it dance and move around, and that's caused by the atmosphere that we're looking at, the Earth's atmosphere. Because we're looking through the Earth's atmosphere, the starlight, or the Mars light in this case, is being distorted and moved around. Very similar to when you put a penny on the bottom of a swimming pool. The water, the turbulence in the water really makes the image of the penny dance around. It's very hard to get a clear shot or a clear image of the penny because of the turbulence in the water. The more still the water is, the clearer the image. What we're able to do, what advanced amateurs are able to do with video images like you see here, is they're able to do what's called image processing and bring many of these images together to form a overall good image. And for instance, this image here was generated as part of a video stream here. So you can see the dramatic improvement that can be made by combining images together, subtracting out the Earth's atmosphere as best we can, and then producing a combined image. And that's like you can see here. So here you see the disk of Mars. You'll see that it has kind of that reddish appearance. It gives Mars its name, the red planet. These dark areas here are features on Mars. They typically are just areas where there might be less dust or different kinds of terrain. And then you'll see bright features either at the southern end or the northern end of Mars, and those are the caps, the polar caps of Mars, and those could be made of water ice or carbon dioxide ice. So here are some pictures that we have that one of our members took and processed. This was taken say a month and a half ago. Mars was still approaching, or the Earth was still approaching Mars. And now here we get Mars getting closer and closer. Here's a really good picture. I'm going to concentrate on that one here in a minute. And then here's one near closest approach. As we get closest to opposition, Mars, we can start to see the full sunlit side of Mars. Whereas when we're still approaching opposition with Mars, we're seeing most of the daytime side of Mars, but we see a little bit of the nighttime side. And that's why it doesn't look like a complete circle. These images are really fantastic, and I want to point out to you how you can correlate these pictures. So here's a picture taken through a telescope. And if we compare that then to images we can pull off of Google Earth, and Google Earth has the ability not only to do have Earth imagery, it has lunar imagery and Martian imagery as well. So we're able to use Google Earth to look at this side of Mars. We can correlate the side and the rotational period of this image with with an illustration here. This is from Google Earth. This is what's called an albedo map that was made back in the early 60s before NASA spacecraft started to visit the Martian planet. All we had to go by were telescopic observations. And for the most part, all we could see on the surface of Mars were these bright and dark features that you see here. After we had visited Mars with spacecrafts, then we started to see higher and higher levels of detail. And so if you use Google Earth to look at Mars, remove this albedo map, this drawing, and replace it just with satellite imagery, you start to get an idea of what the Martian surface looks like. And then I'm going to zoom in on this little area right here. So this little dark peninsula here called Syrtis Major, very prominent feature on Mars. You can see it in the sketch over here, taken back in the early 60s. And this feature has been visible on Mars for well over 100 years. And then in the actual satellite imagery, you can kind of see the dark areas, but it's much less noticeable as you get higher resolution images of Mars. And if I zoom in just a little bit right off the tip of this Syrtis Major area, now we can see things that the very first spacecraft that flew by Mars back in the mid-60s saw. They saw craters. And this put a big dash in our hopes for what we might find in terms of intelligent life on Mars, because up until then we didn't know. There was a lot of speculation that we knew that Mars had an atmosphere. We could see clouds in the atmosphere. We knew they had polar caps. We thought we saw green vegetation on the surface of Mars that seemed to change and vary with seasons. We knew that Mars had seasons very similar to the Earth. But the wake-up call came in the mid-60s when the first spacecraft flew by Mars, and we saw things like these. And then we began to realize that Mars might be more moon-like than Earth-like. Well, it turns out Mars has features of both. It does have craters very similar to those that you would see on the moon, but it does have these polar caps and very thin atmosphere that is a little bit Earth-like. And we believe that it has subsurface water in the surface, and that's what most of these missions that have been traveling to Mars. In fact, we have 3 missions right now on their way to Mars, including the United States as their Mars 2020 mission, which will drop a rover in an area just to the left here of the Syrtis Major Peninsula in a crater called Jezero, and it's going to drop it right in this area right here. And that landing date is planned for February 18th of next year. So that'll be a big day for the United States as we drop our lander onto the surface, if everything survives in one piece, and they're able to deploy the rover from the lander. There's also a helicopter or a drone that's on board that will be taking off and flying around. And I think it'll be the first flying vehicle that we have on the surface of another planet. So that'll also be really something interesting to see as this little drone goes flying around the surface close to the lander and providing photographs and other data. Here's another video loop. This one's of Jupiter. And as John mentioned, Jupiter is the brightest star to the due south at this time of night. Jupiter's disk is pretty much white in color, but it has these bands, these brownish, orangish bands that cross the surface. These are cloud belts. Jupiter is orbiting, or spinning on its axis, I should say. Spinning on its axis, this is its north and south polar axis here in this direction. So it's spinning very rapidly like a top. It takes only around 10 hours for Jupiter to make one rotation. And these cloud belts are weather systems that are being smeared out across the different latitudes on the planet. So the equator of Jupiter is kind of right in between these two dark bands. The equator is just in this area right here. In the southern part of Jupiter, So if you go below the equator, below this equatorial belt here is a very famous feature called the red spot, the Great Red Spot. And that's visible in a large size telescope. And once again, these pictures were processed, image processed from video streams like you see here on the left. And then finally, we have Saturn. Saturn right now is also up in the southern sky, just to the left of Jupiter this time of year. And this video stream shows Saturn from about a month ago. And then some of the image processed images that were resulted from taking these very turbulent, very distorted views, freeze framing them, and then processing them together to perform a very sharp and clear image. These are amazing, amazing shots. And as you can see, the main part of the main feature on Saturn that makes it so fun to look at is the rings. It's unique from the standpoint of that it has rings that are visible from the Earth with just a normal telescope. A couple other planets actually have rings, but they're almost impossible to see from the Earth, even with large telescopes, and require spacecraft to see them. But Saturn's rings are visible through almost any size telescope. If you check a telescope out of the local library, you can actually use that telescope from your local library to see Saturn's rings. So try to take this opportunity while Saturn is still in the evening sky to observe it. It's really spectacular. Now I want to move over to the night sky and talk a little bit about some of the other things that John had mentioned. He mentioned the Milky Way, and you can kind of see the Milky Way here in this photograph taken, this was probably taken back in July. We see the summertime Milky Way stretching out through Scorpius and Sagittarius and so on. This is a great time of year to see the Milky Way because because fall that it gets darker earlier and it's cool and comfortable. Now, one of the main features are one of the main objects in the sky that I like to look at is called the Andromeda Galaxy. It's a neighbor to our own Milky Way galaxy. And it's one of the few objects you can actually see with your unaided eye that's actually outside of our own galaxy. Now, we believe that Andromeda Galaxy is very similar to our own. It's a spiral galaxy. It has a bright center to it with kind of a bulging spherical center. And then it has a flat disk beyond that, very thin disk of material that has what's called spiral arms as the galaxy rotates around a spin axis. It takes around a 250 million years for it to make one revolution, like our Milky Way. You might also see a couple other objects here, this one and this one. These are satellite galaxies. These are satellite galaxies of the Andromeda Galaxy. And the Milky Way has some satellite galaxies of its own. So let's go look at our galaxy. It's hard to take a picture of our galaxy when you're sitting inside of it. A lot harder. It's much easier to take a picture of an external galaxy. But here is thousands and thousands of photographs that have been combined together to take a picture of the Milky Way galaxy from inside. So from our vantage point in the spiral arms, we're looking towards the center of our galaxy here. You can kind of see that bulge area. That's very similar to what you saw in the Andromeda Galaxy. You'll see these dark areas, these zones of dark voids, as it were. And astronomers did not know at first if these were truly dark voids, absence of stars and material, or whether there was actually stars and material there that were hidden because of obscuring gas and dust. It turns out this is obscuring gas and dust that is blocking the light from stars that are actually behind or on the other side of the galaxy that we cannot see. And this gas and dust is probably material for future stars. Just as this is our sun formed from a large gas cloud, future stars will form out of these large gas clouds that you see here. Now in this view, kind of stretched out the way we saw the Andromeda, here's a couple of satellite galaxies right here. These are called the Magellanic Clouds. there are two galaxies that orbit around our own galaxy. Unfortunately, they're only visible in the southern hemisphere. We didn't find out about them. Europeans didn't find out about them until Magellan went around the Horn of South America, and that's why they're named after him, the Magellanic Clouds. Up here on this side, this bright small object right here, that's actually the Andromeda Galaxy sitting right up here. Let's take another photograph here. Same photograph, I just did some outlines for us. I traced the stars where the Big Dipper is sitting in the sky. Here's the Andromeda here. The galaxy center has stayed right where it's at, of course. And we're focusing tonight on this area of the sky called the Summer Triangle region. This is the area that's visible this time of year, right after it gets dark. And in particular, we're going to focus on the Cygnus region and on the Aquila region, which are in the Milky Way. Here are some stylized renditions, kind of similar to the ones that John showed earlier tonight. These are postcards from the mid-19th century showing illustrations of the two constellations. Here's Cygnus the Swan, here's Deneb at the tail of the Swan, and then Alberio down here at the head of the Swan here. Here is the Eagle, Aquila, with Altair sitting here at the head, the tail going back in this direction. And your imagination is free to make whatever sort of birds or images that you like. Now, this is an image of the nighttime sky showing many, many stars here. And let's add some lines like what John did earlier. And we're going to, as I mentioned, this is the Cygnus Aquila region of the sky. We have this cross area here. This is called the Northern Cross. It's an asterism. It's part of Cygnus the Swan. And if you remember from John's earlier discussion, we have Deneb here back at the tail of the Swan, and Alberio over here at the head. And then the wings extend out on either side of the Swan like this. And then down here on this end of the, to the south of Cygnus is where we have Altair and the head of the eagle, and then the rest of the eagle extends outside the visible part of the picture here. Now, what I like so much about this area, it's fun to explore with binoculars and with the telescope, but it's also really cool to keep in mind all of the things that we discovered in this part of the sky over the last 50 years, things that were never known before. And so I wanted to highlight just a couple of those. First of all, starting back in the early 2000s, we sent a satellite up into space to go orbit around the sun and to stare at a region of the sky near Deneb, just to the west of Deneb. This area here was studied by what's called the Kepler satellite. And this Kepler search area stared at around 500,000 stars in the sky, almost on a continuous basis. And it was looking for minute fluctuations in the brightness of those stars. And John mentioned that brightness of stars can be because they're variable stars. There's some mechanism in the star itself that causes the varying brightness. And a number of variable stars were discovered using Kepler. But we were able to figure out which stars were varying very small amounts, and those might be, the fluctuation might be due to to a planet, to an unseen planet passing in front of the star and blocking part of its light. And through a lot of observation, continuous observation of this large number of stars, over 9 years, they were able to watch these stars dim and then get bright again, dim and get bright again, as the planet orbited the star and blocked the starlight many times. And so out of all those 500,000 stars, they detected and confirmed around 2,600 planets around those stars. And those you may have heard about. There's They vary a lot as to what kind of planets they are. Some are much more massive than the Earth, maybe even larger than Jupiter, our largest planet. But a small portion of them are Earth-like and are inside of what's called the habitable zone of the star. And that means that, like our Earth has liquid water because we are close enough to the sun that our water doesn't freeze over the entire surface. But yet we're not so close to the sun that the water would evaporate and completely disappear. So like our inner planets, like Mercury, is just too close to the sun to keep liquid water or even vapor so it really doesn't have an atmosphere to speak of. Venus has an atmosphere, but it's got a very poisonous atmosphere. Seems like it's got very little water in it and more of other types of materials that are probably due to volcanism. And then get out to Mars. Mars is cold. Water would not flow normally on Mars because of how cold it is there. It would normally be frozen, but the atmosphere of Mars is also really too thin to support frozen water over its entire surface. It can support it at the poles, and we believe it can support it in the subsurface below the frost line or below the dirt where it's in some insulation. We believe there's water ice there as well. But this is fascinating to think about, that when we look up here at Cygnus, the Swan, that this portion of the sky has been studied, and over 2,000 planets have been discovered just in this small area of the sky. And if we look back again, I'm going to backtrack to our overall Milky Way shot here. We're talking about an area, just a small area inside of this ellipse here, where these 2,000 stars, where these 2,000 planets, around 500,000 stars, have been detected. And when you think about all the other stars that are in our galaxy, and we believe there's over 200 billion stars in our galaxy, it really is just a sampling of what may be out there. The other cool thing that was found in the constellation Cygnus is the first authenticated or first confirmed black hole. Cygnus X1 was the designation given to this object. It was first discovered in 1963 due to when we sent rockets into the upper atmosphere in order to look for X-rays, and it discovered some X-ray sources in the constellation Cygnus, but it couldn't figure out what was causing X-rays to be generated from such a tiny little area in the sky. Turns out that there's a ninth magnitude star that you can see with your binoculars, and it's actually in orbit around a black hole. And here's an artist's illustration from NASA showing what we think it might be like at Cygnus X1. Here's the black hole sitting over here. Here's this large giant or supergiant blue star is having some of its atmosphere siphoned off of it. So some of its atmosphere is escaping and being vacuumed up by the black hole. And when that energy, or when that matter from the star goes into orbit and collides around the black hole, that's where the X-ray generation is done. The gas gets so hot that it actually generates X-rays, very high energy photons. Now, this was first confirmed in 1990, but there was a bet made. It was conjectured back as early as 1973 that there must be a very compact object that this star is orbiting around. And it was unseen. It was too faint to see the object itself, so it must be very, very compact. So speculation began as early as 1973 that this could be a black hole. And in fact, in 1974, Stephen Hawking and Kip Thorne made a friendly wager as to whether or not it would ever be confirmed as a black hole. And Stephen Hawking took the negative side of that, said, no, I don't think it will be. Kip Thorne took the positive side, said, yes, I believe it's a black hole. Both of them, I think, believe that it would be confirmed as a black hole. In fact, Stephen Hawking did a lot of the mathematical analysis to show that black holes of this size should exist. So by him taking the contrary position, even if he lost the bet, it would confirm his theories that solar mass black holes do exist. And it was in around 1990, as I mentioned, that the final evidence came in. Stephen Hawking gave up the bet. He admitted that he lost the bet to Kip Thorne, and I forget what I think it was a dollar bill or something that was wagered as the bet, and I think Kip Thorne still has that framed and posted in his office. So it's really cool to think about that while you're scanning this part of Cygnus the Swan, that a 9th magnitude star located down the post of the Northern Cross here, right near this star. This is Eta. It's called Eta Cygni. It's just off of that star is a 9th magnitude star, and around that star is actually orbiting around something that's more massive than itself, but yet is so small and so dark that it cannot be seen with a telescope. It can only be seen with X-rays, and that's what this illustration shows here. Well, that's where I'm going to leave it for tonight in terms of reviewing the nighttime sky. It looks like it's clear tonight, and the temperature looks like it's very comfortable outside. So I would recommend that everybody get outside with their chairs and sit and enjoy the moon, use your binoculars, and enjoy this early fall time. Here are some references. You can get sky maps online, so you can do your own sky hopping or star hopping by going out there. The Stellarium software is available as a web-based software, and so you can use it right online if you like. You can print out maps and get star maps. There's several magazines on astronomy that are out there that are excellent to look at. If you are interested in satellites or looking at the International Space Station when it might fly over St. Louis, this website right here, heavensabove.com, is an excellent website for that. I've got the location here for the Gateway Arch on this link. And then Google Moon, I mentioned that earlier. Google Moon, Mars, and Google Earth all are great reference sources. Spaceweather.com is a great website that will give you notification of when sunspots and solar activity is happening. It will also let you know if there's any possibility of aurora visible in Missouri. That's very rare. It may happen only once a year or once every other year that aurora gets this far south. It's more likely to be seen in the very northern tiered states up Wisconsin, Minnesota, Montana, places like that. But we are starting to enter into, after a low sunspot activity, the sun is now starting to pick up on its 11-year cycle of solar activity, and we're starting to go back on the upswing now of increased solar activity and more sunspots will start to appear on the sun. We think that will mean there'll be more solar flares and other things like that that will start to happen on the surface of the sun, and those could create aurora that might be visible as far south as St. Louis. But if not, you may have to travel to Alaska or, like I say, the northern tiered states in order to see it. And then here's our Facebook page. SLAS Online has our SLAS Facebook page here, SDL Astro, and then slasonline.org is our website. So I thank you all, and I will stop sharing, and we can take any questions.
Well, thank you, guys. So we have a couple questions. We're pretty much almost out of time here, but we do have a couple questions. One, maybe Mark, you can address this one, and that is, why is Mercury not on your first chart? Are we unable to see Mercury with a telescope at all?
Actually, yeah, Mercury is a big challenge for most observers. It is entering one of its most opportune times to see it. It will be at what's called greatest eastern elongation here, I think next week. But it's visible only right after sunset, and you have to know where it's quite a challenging object. I didn't mention it just because it's something it's usually a challenge to find, but if you are interested in it, go find those star maps that I mentioned, and you got about a week to see it in the evening sky.
So we have another question, or maybe more of a comment, that, wow, that's pretty cool that Google Earth can be used to look at Mars. I think there's actually a lot of features on Google Earth that allows you to look at various planets. Is that right?
Well, I know for sure that it has a Mars and a Moon database. And so you can certainly explore Mars and you can explore the Moon using Google Earth. And I do that fairly often. You can explore the Apollo landing sites. You can look at some of the future landing sites where we think we might land. We're hoping to land astronauts on the Moon in the mid-2020s. So you can look for some of those areas as well.
All right, cool. Last question. What can you see with binoculars when you look at planets? Can you see the rings of Saturn or the moons of Jupiter? What can you tell us about that, one of you guys?
I would say that the moons of Jupiter are certainly within the power of binoculars. I typically use binoculars that are called 10 by 50. The 10x means the power or the magnification that the binocular gives, and then the second number, the 50, is the diameter of the lens at the front of the binoculars. And I find with 10 by 50 binoculars that I can see the moons of Jupiter fairly easily. They're bright, and they're far enough away from the planet that I can see them. I have not been able to see the rings of Saturn with those kind of binoculars. And so I would recommend, if you have a pair of binoculars or want to buy a pair, try to buy something in that 10 by 50 range. If you have something like a 7 by 35 or an 8 by 42, certainly give it a try.